let's sit up here. Let's sit up here, and I'll introduce this while we're in our chair. If there's a stage, if we were up on a stage, we would have a grand introduction. We'll do, unless you object, ladies and gentlemen, I thought we'd we try to make this a little less formal and more of a discussion.
You use the mics.
And we're going to put our mics on so you can hear us. And thank you for the souvenirs. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for sustaining yourselves as we talk about sustainability and economic growth on day 3. I know it's easier to come to these things on day 1 than day 3, but we know that you're here because you're interested in this topic. My name is Dan Witt. I'm from the International Tax and Investment Center, and we have a very distinguished panel, and their names are behind us. But to make it obvious who's who, Valeria Perotti, the business ready manager from the World Bank, who has deep experience on the enterprise side of the bank before moving over to this policy side of the bank. And that's a very important combination. It's one thing to advise on rules. It's another thing to see how do you live with the rules and where are they helpful, where are they hurtful. And to my left, we have the Honorable Dingane Banda, Commissioner General of the Revenue of the Zambia Revenue Authority. And Mr. Commissioner General, you were so gracious and warm in hosting a workshop we did in August. I said to you, have I got a deal for you? I want you to come to Washington and showcase the wonderful reforms you have been leading in Zambia here in Washington. And with what we try with every program that ITIC has done in our 33 years, we started at the invitation of the Russian Ministry of Finance when the Soviet Union dissolved and they had to come up with their own new laws. And they wanted to understand the role of tax in competing for capital. So that's how that was our birth, Russia and Kazakhstan. And over those 33 years, we've touched 87 countries. But our model is unique in that we try to have a triangle. We make a triangle, and Rocky Reef, Vice President of Public Policy, Global Public Policy at the Coca-Cola Company, and I think it's 160 countries you touch. You can self-introduce a little bit there. But Rocky fills out the triangle. We think you can discuss policy best when you have a triangle of taxpayers, tax authorities, or tax policymakers, and independent experts. At the end of the day, it's up to the sovereign to make the decision, but we want you to understand the full picture. And that's what we hope we can provide today. So let me just back up a moment. The star of our event is going to be Valeria presenting the tax aspects of the Be Ready report. It's a fairly new product by the bank, and so she'll present, and then we're going to hear a reaction from a commissioner, a tax commissioner, and then from a taxpayer. But let me just set the scene a little bit. And I presented some variant to these remarks at a conference organized by the Chinese at the Belt and Road Tax Administration Cooperation Forum, Britikov, in September. Might have picked the wrong week to be in Nepal, but everybody was safe, and we got to see another youth-led revolution. Hafiz was with me. So over the past 33 years, as I said, we've touched 88 countries, and many of those 43 countries in Nepal are places we've worked. And we touch on the full range of tax policy and administration, income, VAT, excises, extractives, and over the last 8 years, digital, and now we've started some discussions on AI. We tax labor. Is AI a substitute? On the very front end. And I remember in 1994, the discussions that were just starting on the taxation of e-commerce, they called it. And look where it is today. But we also take the other part of our name, investment, very seriously. Investment is essential for economic growth. Nations cannot grow without both domestic and foreign investors being confident that their investments will bring a strong return. They're in business. They want to make a return on investment. A return on investment means revenue and money for development in your country. It's win-win. And I want to be polite in this house of the World Bank, but all too often those of us who believe in the power of markets to drive growth have been accused of engaging in a race to the bottom. And you've heard that here. It's been kind of quiet on that for the last 2 years because you've now been focusing on growth. But the suggestion is that instituting market reforms means cutting standards. I believe differently. I think of countries engaging, and if we just advance the slide, I think of countries engaging, here it is, a race to the top. Let's strive for the top, not the bottom, by growing faster, delivering the benefits of this growth to your people, increasing employment, raising workers' incomes, and all of this together will deliver more revenues for governments, allow governments to spend more on human capital, and ultimately improve the quality of life for your people. Second point, and second and final slide. Over the course of my career, I've seen good and bad examples of investment policies and tax policies. Countries have done some things well, other things poorly. But from this work, I've developed a simple formula, an equation, if you will, that captures the basic truths of economics. And it's right behind me. Investment plus employment equals taxes. Only then do you have more money to invest in development. And some of my colleagues in this business, they like to talk about these issues, and they like to start their analysis and focus only on tax and development. You've heard it, taxes and development, and you're missing the key contributions of investment and employment. Both sides of the equation are necessary if we're committed and serious about reducing poverty and driving growth. And we've got some academics in the room. I will just caution you, there are 2 footnotes to this that I'm not going to elaborate on, but I want to remind you. One is a positive and one is a negative. The negative, no surprise, when it comes to the business of tax and customs, is corruption. This has high social costs. It reduces the attractiveness of your country as a destination for investment, and it reduces growth. The positive footnote are the gains from tax simplification and making tax compliance easier. It's this positive footnote that I now turn it over to Valeria, because that's the focus of your new life's work. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome.
Thank you, Dan, for the very kind introduction. And thank you all, including people connected online, for dedicating an hour or so of your time to this important topic. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to present to you the Business Ready report, which is a corporate report of the World Bank Group benchmarking the business environment worldwide. Business Ready is in a rollout phase as a new project. So we have released in 2024 our first report covering 50 economies, and we're gradually expanding coverage every year. We'll expand to 102 economies this year and over 160 next year. In this process, we're also refining our methodology, and so we are particularly keen in engaging in this type of events and discussions to see also how we can better refine our methodology, and we very much look forward to feedback and discussions afterwards. But let me start by saying, why is it so important, especially today, for economies to be business ready? Well, we know, for example, that in middle-income economies, it is necessary to achieve high rates of growth on an annual basis, 5%, to escape the middle-income trap. So for middle-income economies to be able to proceed on their path to become high-income economies. This is even more challenging in lower-income economies that need to achieve growth rates of 9% annually to eliminate extreme poverty within a decade. So how can we achieve this? We need to really enable the private sector, because the private sector is an economic giant. In developing economies, it provides 90% of jobs and between 70 to 80% of output, investment, and government revenue. Actually, in President Banga's words from the civil society town hall on Monday, jobs are the ultimate outcome. Jobs provide dignity, purpose, they unlock potential, they empower women and youth. They also reduce the need for assistance. So job creation is really what drives, I think, the discussion today, as well as Dan has highlighted earlier. So how can we help the private sector be that engine of job creation? Dan was mentioning the importance of investment. We know that investment growth has slowed very much in recent years. It went from around 8% annual growth rate to just over 5%. To re-energize the private sector, what's needed is the right business environment. We need to make sure to eliminate uncertainty, to eliminate barriers, constraints that prevent the private sector from innovating, generating growth, creating jobs. Now, in fact, one of the pillars of the World Bank Group's strategy on job creation is really to support policy and regulatory reforms that establish a business-friendly environment. And this includes clear laws, predictable tax systems. So we're going to talk more about that in a minute. So here comes the Business Ready report and data to support improving the business environment. What we do is we provide a diagnostic tool, a very rich one, with lots of indicators that help governments, but also the private sector, to see what needs to be improved in the economy, to also learn from other economies in terms of good practices that are working well and others that need to be implemented. We do so by looking across 10 topics that follow the life cycle of a firm. So we start from business entry, when a company gets registered, either as a domestic or foreign-owned firm, throughout several processes, such as establishing the location for the company, which could be through by leasing a property, by purchasing a property, or by building a property. And then securing reliable utility services, such as electricity, water, internet. Then hiring workers, adjusting the workforce based on the business needs, while also providing worker safety and workers' rights. Using and accessing financial services, getting loans, using electronic payments. Then some firms, not all firms, engage in international trade. And all formal firms have to deal with taxation, which we are going to discuss more at length today. Other topics we cover include aspects of resolving commercial disputes, aspects of market competition, for example, which includes not only competition law, but also the competition for government contracts in the area of public procurement, innovation. And finally, business insolvency, where we look at laws, processes, services when a firm needs to be liquidated or reorganized. These 10 topics all have the same structure. They are based on 3 pillars. The first pillar is the regulatory framework, where we look at the laws and regulations that firms need to comply with as they start, operate, and expand or close their business. Pillar 2 is public services, and this refers to the facilities, the infrastructure that governments provide to support firms and markets in both complying with regulations as well as to operate effectively. Pillar 3 is operational efficiency, where we look at the ease of compliance for firms, so how time-consuming, how costly it is to comply with the regulations and also to access those public services provided by governments. We have some examples here from different topics. We'll see more examples on taxation. This is from the business location topic as well as the dispute resolution topic, for example. Where do we gather our data from? We have 2 data sources, complementary, that we use for different purposes. One is by sending questionnaires to private sector experts, and the other is by making use of the data collected by our colleagues in the Enterprise Surveys team, which is an independent project that has been going on for 20 years in the World Bank Group. We use expert questionnaires when we want to learn about existing laws and regulations, as well as services that only practitioners would deal with on a daily basis. So experts in this case are the most informed respondents to tell us about what's implemented in the country. And we collect this data on an annual basis once an economy is included in Business Ready. The enterprise surveys, on the other hand, contain a lot of information. We use only some of it for Business Ready. They interview a representative sample of formal firms in each economy. We're talking about hundreds of firms, if not more. And these surveys really capture the de facto experience of the firms, how long it took them to get a certain permit, or whether they access certain services, whether, for example, they pay taxes electronically or not. This type of information is collected every 3 years. Now, from these data sources, we have, as I mentioned earlier, a very rich data set of about 1,200 indicators for each economy. And this is very rich, granular information that's very important for formulating specific policy advice. But we also need to convey this in a practical way, especially when advocating for reform at high level. So we also summarize all this information into simple scores that range from 0 to 100. So you can think of these as measures of business readiness, how business ready is an economy. We have 3 pillar scores following the structure I presented before, and 10 topic scores. When building these scores, we also strike a balance between firm flexibility and social benefits. What do I mean by firm flexibility? Well, this refers to good practices, either in the laws and regulations or in public services, that support the operation of an individual firm. They increase benefits or reduce cost of running a business. But that's not all that matters from the business ready perspective, because we look at private sector development as a whole. So we also consider social benefits, which is the impact that the same laws and regulations and public services have on other socially desirable outcomes, such as workers' welfare, consumer protection, environmental protection, fiscal sustainability, equal access to business opportunities. So you can see we really strive here to achieve a good balance. Now, let me give you a quick overview of the results emerging from the Business Ready 2024 report. Again, please keep in mind this covers 50 economies worldwide, and we will be expanding this number this year. So, not surprisingly, perhaps, we find that wealthier economies tend to be more business ready. We have the example of Estonia, which had the highest public services score, and Singapore, which had the highest operational efficiency score. So no country really excels in everything, by the way. But we also found, interestingly, that countries don't need to be rich to have a good business environment. And we have examples from across the different regions. For example, in Rwanda, which achieved very good performance in the regulatory framework, but also in public services and to some extent operational efficiency. Georgia, Colombia also performed well in the regulatory framework, for example. Vietnam performed very well on operational efficiency. Another important finding is that there is a public services gap. What do I mean by that? Is simply that the regulatory framework score is always higher than the public services score. In simple words, this means that economies are better at enacting regulations than they are at providing the services that firms and markets need. We observe this gap very consistently across different regions, different topics, and different income levels, although you can see that the gap becomes narrower as at higher levels of income, as well as the business environment improves overall. We also find that there is room to improve across all Be-Ready topics, and since we're here to talk about taxation, I will in particular highlight the fact that, for example, taxation was the topic with the third lowest average score among all topics. Here, the slide compares the score achieved by the best performer in that topic compared to the average score in that topic. So for taxation, you can see that even the economy with the high score, which is New Zealand with 72, is still very far from 100. So there's a lot to do still. But let's talk more about why, in particular, taxation matters, and why is it that effective tax policy, efficient, transparent tax administration is so critical for economic growth. Well, if you're attending this session on taxation, I probably don't need to convince you that taxation is important, for example, to fund essential public services, to provide physical infrastructure, to support human capital development through education, healthcare, and so forth. But what's really important to emphasize, I think, today for this discussion is that taxation is also an important instrument to enable the business environment, to support firms as they invest, innovate, grow, and create jobs. We know that predictable and transparent tax systems are critical to support private investment. We also know that taxation is a powerful tool to address other challenges, such as environmental protection and gender equality and social inclusion. So what do we cover more specifically in the taxation topic of Business Ready? Like all other topics, it is structured in the 3 pillars. So under the first pillar, regulatory framework, we look at the quality of tax regulations. And by that, we have different categories of indicators. The first one is clarity and transparency. Examples of these include the availability of tax guidance, of public consultations as the laws get approved and enacted. In the second category of administrative procedures, we include things such as the availability of simplified record keeping and tax reporting, the availability of VAT refund, as well as clarity on registration fees. These are just some examples. Remember, we have 1,200 indicators, so it's impossible to summarize all here, but I want to give you a flavor of what's included in all of this. The third, on environmental fiscal instruments, simply looks at the existence of such instruments and the process for enacting them, the consultation process behind it. The second pillar of the taxation topic, public services, looks at things like digital services for taxpayers, so the existence and the functionalities of taxpayer portals, as well as the availability of electronic filing, electronic payment, and so forth. The second category on data management and system integration in the tax administration is a bit about what we call interoperability, make sure that the systems talk to each other. And, for example, it captures automated tax registration, the existence of taxpayer databases, and the use of taxpayer identification numbers. In the category of transparency, we look at, of course, transparency and accountability as well. And then in the category of tax audits and related disputes, examples include the existence of an annual tax audit plan, and so forth. Finally, the third pillar, I think something happened with the formatting, operational efficiency. This is where, as I was mentioning earlier, we really capture the experience of the firms. And so we look at the time and functionality of process. What do I mean by that? For example, how long it takes to file and to pay taxes, or how long it takes to complete a tax audit or a tax dispute, as well as the use of VAT refund. The second category in operational efficiency is about the financial burden, because that matters too, of course. Here we look at the effective tax rate that firms pay on profit and unemployment-based taxes. What are some of the findings from 2024, again, from this sample of 50 economies? Well, consistent with the overall findings, there's a lot of room for improvement. We find, for example, that only 1 in 5 of the economies included in this year's report scored over 50 points out of 100 in each of the 3 pillars. So quite rare to find economies that achieve at least half the score in all 3 pillars. Only one economy, Estonia, scored more than 65 points in all 3 pillars. We can look into, for example, tax registration and deregistration, see the incidence of that. So we find that only half of the economies offer automated or online tax registration upon incorporation. And the situation is worse for tax deregistration, where 70% of economies do not perform it automatically or online. Another area for improvement is on public accountability of the tax authority. While all economies have some measures in place, for example, they conduct taxpayer satisfaction perception surveys, they publish feedback results, they disclose a code of ethics, and so forth, none of the economies achieves full points on this, in this area. There's a lot more to uncover. So I will stop here, but I really encourage you to visit our website to learn more about the granular data that's available, find out about your country, and compare with other countries. And I really look forward also to hear from my fellow panelists to see how these data can be helpful for them. And of course, I look forward to the questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, as tax folks, Let's not let these three pillars be confused with the OECD G20, Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. No further opinion on those points. And the other point that struck me is that I'm glad you're not my university professor, because I think A's would be pretty hard to get, with 72 being the top score in New Zealand is a pretty business-ready place. Let's mix it up. I was going to start with some questions to you, but let's turn to our Commissioner General. You weren't covered in this first round of 50 countries. I know you've driven a lot of reforms under your leadership. Maybe do a little self-assessment. Which of these three pillars of taxation do you think Zambia is the strongest, and where might you be focusing to improve over the next 2 years?
First of all, thank you for inviting Zambia to be part of this discussion. I do recognize we're not part of the survey, but we'll try to take the tests within this environment for now. Yeah, so in terms of Zambia, I think we just need to give a bit of a context so that you have a clear understanding. As you know, most developing countries now, domestic resource mobilization is quite a topical issue. Governments are increasingly depending on local resources to finance the budgets. And in the case of Zambia, we've moved from a contribution to the national budget from about 49% in 2021. This year, we're expected to contribute about 72%. And by next year, overall, but that's both tax and non-tax revenue is expected to contribute 82% to the revenue. And that's the budget that the minister just announced. So we can see that tax is a key component also in terms of driving economic growth and also ensuring that the governments have the resources to drive domestic resource mobilization. But what we're struggling with in most African countries is the tax to GDP. You find the average is around 15% in most cases. And when you compare with OECD countries, much higher than that, I think about 30%. So all these are some of the challenges that we face. Now, if you look at the issue of domestic resource mobilization, it's a highly prioritized area in the sense that government has to come up with a policy pronouncement in terms of how will it be able to generate these resources in the midst of also trying to create an environment that promotes private sector investment. Now, in the case of Zambia, part of the key reforms the past, especially 4 years, have been, first of all, policy stability. We're coming from a background where mining sector is a major contributor to revenue. Between 30 to 40% of this revenue comes from the mining sector. But we've had several policy changes, and which were not to the liking of the business community, because they created a lot of unpredictability and so forth. But the new government said we want to have a stable policy environment from 2021. And with that, also the government pronounced itself that we want to improve operational efficiency of the tax administration. That is one of the key aspects. Then also to seal the revenue leakages. Tax administrations have a lot of revenue leakages. And above all, to expand the tax base. And with that, also the government pronounced itself in terms of where is the money going to be allocated. And quite substantial amounts were channeled towards the aspects that will lift the social and well-being of the ordinary people out there. We have introduced, for example, free education from 2022, whereby now we have 2.3 million children that were previously out of school. They are now back in school. There's, as part of decentralization policy, money that is allocated to each constituency in the country. We used to allocate about $100,000 equivalent. Now that has increased to $1.6 million per constituency, meaning that each district, each locality in the country has to plan for its own development. And so forth. We have the recruitment of teachers, recruitment of health workers, all this is now being channeled towards these strategic reforms. Now, talking about the three pillars, it's interesting. I was also confusing them with the topical issues earlier on, and I was saying, is this a right debate for us? But I was assured that indeed it's a different pillars we're discussing, so I'm very comfortable to discuss those. Yeah. So looking at the three pillars from our end, I think in terms of the regulatory environment, you can see that, like you've rightly indicated, most countries are doing very well on that aspect. It's easier to formulate the laws, and Zambia is not an exception. We've done that very well in terms of aligning the laws to the needs of the various sectors. We've had, for example, a number of laws that have recently been adjusted to align to promote investment, for example, in the multi-facility economic zones. As I'm speaking today, Zambia was launching one of the major fertilizer plants. We've moved from a net importer of fertilizer to a net exporter over the years through the investment in the manufacturing sector and so forth. So there have been a lot of laws that have been formulated, and these have also been responsive to the demands from the business sector in terms of how do we create a policy environment that supports private sector investment. And on the second pillar, in terms of public services, I must mention that it's an area also that we think we've done very well. We one of the countries that, for example, was an early adopter of electronic services. So registration for a company, you can do it online. And the good part is that when you register a business with the institution responsible for registration of companies, you instantly get your taxpayer identification number from the Revenue Authority, because we are connected to that. Now, when you look at the processes further, if you want to acquire property, again, it's an area that we've highly automated. We are integrated with the ministry responsible for lands. When you want to transfer your property, you'll be able to do that from the comfort of your office or home, because we are connected, and you can pay all these online. We've not only catered for the formal businesses, we've also reduced or aligned our solutions to the small-scale businesses. So a lot of platforms also are available on the mobile phones. This is even on basic feature phones on USSD platforms, where you can register for a taxpayer identification number, you can file a return, you can pay for taxes on a simple phone. And we've scaled that to a higher level. And with that also, we have integrated ourselves to the ecosystem that prevails in the country. Most African countries now, transactions are done on mobile phones. You can send money on a mobile phone and so forth. So even tax administration also, we've made sure that you are able to pay for taxes on the mobile phone at a minimum. And the bank transfers and electronic transfers, so on, for the larger scale players. And we've also made sure that filing of returns, you can do it online. That's both on mobile phone, you can file your return for a simple taxpayer, and also online through our platforms, you can file your return. One of the areas where African countries have challenges is on a system for administering domestic taxes. On the custom side, we are using the SCUDA system, which for us, it has worked very well for a number of years, but of course with a few enhancements here and there. So for trade facilitation, we are using the SCUDA. For domestic taxes, Zambia is one of the few countries in Africa that has developed its own tax administration system. So we've made sure that we cater for the modules to cover the core pillars of domestic tax administration. So from registration to filing of your returns, your accounting processes, your returns and payments, the auditing processes, all those are on the online platform, which we've developed on our own as a country. We've also made sure that we cater for on the trade facilitation side, we've made sure that we also cater for the cross-border traders, in the sense that you can submit your declaration to customs before you reach the border using the mobile phone. So that's part of the scaling down that we've done to make sure that cross-border traders are also catered for in terms of trade facilitation. And we've also adopted the risk-based approach in treatment of our stakeholders, especially on trade facilitation side. We have authorized economic operators, and these are companies that we've validated and say that you can pass through the border. We're going to inspect your goods afterwards. As a result of that, last year, that's 2024, about 57% of our imports and the values of our collections were done without customs making any interventions. So we're taking the same model now to the domestic taxes side, and that's what Dan was talking about, that we hosted this workshop in Zambia. It's on the, among others, we're looking at the cooperative compliance program, where we want to bring the same risk-based approach to domestic taxes now, where we're saying that for you as a large company, once we evaluate your processes, we agree with you, you can comply on your own and be assured that there will be minimal interventions from the tax administrations in terms of regular audits or delays in the payments of refunds and so forth. So at a high level, these are some of the reforms that are taking place, and also we're doing compliance risk management with the support of the Fiscal Affairs Department of IMF, where we want to have a risk-based approach in terms of treatment of our taxpayers. So all these reforms for us are coming from part of the results of the Tax Administration Diagnostic Assessment tool, TADAT. TADAT, in case you didn't know, was born in Zambia. It was piloted in Zambia. Yes, we were the first pilot. And we've gone through two TADAT sessions. The latest one was 2022. And what we've been doing is that out of these reforms, we come up, they feed into our corporate strategic plan to look at what are the areas that we need to address in terms of reforms. And that's what we've done with TADAT. So this has fed into our reforms. So we can say we're doing very well on number 2, but I think there's room for us to do more on number 3, the pillar number 3, which is talking about operational efficiency of tax systems in practice. I think that's where we need to do more. The key areas which we need to improve on, for example, VAT refunds. It's a topical issue. We are not adhering to our time frame at the moment. It's compounded into the overall performance of VAT, which is an area that we're trying to rectify. We've just gone into electronic invoicing now. Building our data warehouses and so forth. Also, we need to simplify our forms. You know, you can have a form electronic, but it's quite complex to fill in. So a lot of process improvement, business engineering needs to be done in those areas so that we make our environment as practical as possible. In a nutshell, I think that's what I can comment on. So to summarize, yes, 1 is good, we're doing well, and 2, but 3, I think there's a lot of room for improvement. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I was impressed as I sat in I've been impressed with your colleagues for many years with the leadership role that Ignatius plays at the United Nations on the Committee of Tax Experts, that Patience plays as chairman of different subcommittees in SADC. So it's not only leadership inside Zambia, but globally and regionally. So that says a lot about Zambia. You care more than just looking inward, but outward. And it's very impressive. And what's really quite heartening is we sit here at the annual meetings of the World Bank and IMF. Here's a country that's using the tools and the resources. You know, there's all kinds of missions, but when can you point to a country where missions have been at the central part of successful reforms that flow to the people? And what struck me is that objective measure of success on 2.2 million students enrolled in school, and they weren't a year ago. That's impacting people, and that's investing in your future. Very impressive. I've got a couple more points, but let's go on to Rocky. The taxpayer. Taxes matter. You've got a limited amount of capital to invest. How do you make those decisions? How do you look at things like Valeria described in a boardroom to say we're going to invest in country C, not country A and B? And And again, to our friends from the countries here and on the live stream, it goes back to really the birth of ITIC, helping countries put in place a set of rules to fund your government, but first to help you win the competition for capital. And Rocky, they're competing for your capital. Tell us how taxes matter.
Dan, just may back up a minute. A lot of times we talk to companies that are going to invest in countries. I think we're in every country but 3 globally. So it's not very often we get to make a new investment in a new market. If you're looking at a new market or an old market, I think surprisingly, taxes are not at the top of the list, I wouldn't say, in investment. You're really looking at more macro issues. Is the economy growing there? A key issue for us, is there a large emerging middle class that looks like it's growing? What are the demographic fundamentals up underneath that? And do we think this can be a good long-term business investment? When we invest in a country, we're thinking timelines that are going to be 15, 20, 50 years, not a nearer term impact. So kind of our adage is around is that we know we're only going to be home in the U.S., so we try to be a welcome visitor everywhere else we go. But when we visit, we tend to lose our bags and then try to be a welcome visitor from there. So we try to think long-term on it. But from there, I think the 2 most important things that we see kind of relevant for this is what is the stability of the tax system, and how effective is the rule of law, and how is it enforced? Is it enforced equally? So as Coca-Cola, as a multinational, are we treated as if we were a domestic taxpayer? So is there equality on how the law is implemented? And I think from there, for like newer investments that were in countries, then you get much more into how taxes are administered and how it's regulated from that point. But long term is we're trying to go where we have the best opportunity to get the greatest return for our shareholders. And oftentimes, like if we talk to Zambia or something, you may not be competing with your neighbor. You may be competing with Colombia or Estonia for our capital. So you're looking at not necessarily just in a geographic area, but really rates of return on what we can get for our capital globally.
Rocky, just while you're there, and you were very brief, thank you. The Commissioner General mentioned one of the areas to improve under Pillars 3 is VAT refunds. And over coffee, you were sharing a remarkable success story in Uzbekistan. And I think many of us have heard or experienced problems with VAT refunds. Maybe share that wonderful story.
Well, maybe I have 2, but
Okay.
I mentioned this to Valeria. One of my questions is, we as a investor, where can we get her scorecard by country and how can we help? But I'll come to that later. Dan's, we were talking about VAT reform in Uzbekistan. So I think for maybe a year before COVID, Uzbekistan started a serious effort to try to do VAT reform. And kind of the top line of what we pay attention to. So they brought the VAT rate down from 20 to 12, and they increased revenue take from, I believe the numbers are 3.5% of GDP to 4.5% of GDP, while bringing the rates down. And an important part for the business sector is the speed of VAT refunds greatly accelerated. So for a company and you're minding your capital, if you get your money back on VAT reforms or VAT returns very quickly, then you can again reinvest it in the economy and you can stimulate the economy. But it's a pretty remarkable turnaround in a very short period of time. A similar type story, and I'm sure this was captured in the Be Ready work, but in Estonia when they went to digitizing their VAT return, so same rate, same construct, but just by digitizing and expanding what your base is, I believe they got 11 or 12% more revenue by digitizing. So again, as a taxpayer, it's the same rate, but now effectively everybody's in, and it's implemented, and the returns to the exchequer are much greater, and they were able to devote it for further investments that can make it more attractive to the private sector. Dan, I'm not sure if you have more questions or you
No,
want to go
that's
into
wonderful.
detail
I've got
from
some
there.
more, but I want to spread them out, and I really want to save some time. And Hafiz, you're a wizard on this stuff, and you advise governments around the world. So be ready, because I'm going to call on you, but I really want to mix this up. But let's do one more quick round. How do you link your excellent work with investment attraction? Do you connect with those agencies in governments, or do you hand it over to other parts of the World Bank? Because I find governments are trying to really increase their game on investment promotion.
Thanks, Dad. I think this is a very important point, as we often get this type of question, particularly when we engage with governments. The role of my team is really to provide the diagnostics and to help put the spotlight on areas that need to be improved. There are other colleagues within the World Bank group that work closely with countries to design, to implement reforms. So that's not the role of my team, but it's definitely something that governments really look forward to engaging with World Bank teams to design and to implement policies. What we do is we provide this data at different levels of aggregation and for different purposes. So as I was mentioning, in the report, we mostly have high-level information, scores that really draw the attention on where is needed, but when you have to, roll up your sleeves and really design reforms and decide what to change, that's where the granular data comes in, and our colleagues help to see what to do about it and how to improve it.
Okay.
Valeria, do you have a formal handoff when you do that by country? I'm just curious.
So what do you mean exactly?
So you just take Dan example of New Zealand, which is a very business-ready type of economy, and they score 72, and you have a World Bank group that may be working with New Zealand. Do you hand off your findings that they can engage with government? Here are areas that they can improve from your diagnostics, or how does that work internally?
So the way we disseminate the data is just we make everything public. By the way, on the website, you can see every piece of data that we use for the report, so that's accessible to everyone. And then the World Bank works, of course, in certain types of countries, so they will not work with New Zealand typically, but the Be Ready data is a basis to and it's not the only one, of course. This is very important. I think you mentioned how for investors there are other things that matter, like that could be political stability, the macroeconomic situation overall, the demographic perspectives, and we don't capture that, of course. So Business Ready is a very detailed, very comprehensive assessment, but it doesn't cover everything that an investor might want to consider before investing in a country.
I think you see this with different indices. They're noticed by your president, by your prime minister, the journalists, their headlines in the business newspapers, and it comes back and puts pressure on you. How come our neighbor is getting a better score than us? And I know in Central Asia you mentioned Uzbekistan, but I know they look at each other on that. Let's switch back to you, Commissioner General. You talk about digitalization. How has that improved the tax compliance rate? But perhaps more importantly, a point you were qualifying in one of your, maybe on Pillar 1, the formal sector. One of the biggest problems in transition in developing economies is there's a lot of black market. How can we move from the informal to the formal sector? And I remember saying this for the first time. Michael was actually with us, his boss, in Nairobi in December of 2015, and a question and answer on a stage. I said, paying taxes should be easy and not scary. And by scary means you're going to get squeezed for bribes from the tax inspector. And therefore, it's sometimes better to hide than go through all that difficulty to pay taxes and then be squeezed by a corrupt tax inspector. And that's where digitalization has made it easy, and you're not going to get hit up for a bribe on your iPhone or on your laptop. So as a result, it's been easier for people to come in. It's been less dangerous to come in. It's almost like insurance. I'll pay my tax and not worry about the consequences of getting caught. So how has that changed the way of thinking? By, believe it or not, tax inspectors are being more welcoming. Tax authorities are. Tell us the Zambia story.
Thank you. I think I'll pick up the discussion from the non-challenge of law compliance and also the huge informal sector, particularly in developing countries. Now, we need to be very careful in terms of defining who is this person or company in the informal, so-called informal sector. If you look at the developing country context, most of the companies or individuals we call informal, you find that in most cases they're only informal to the tax authority. They will have, let's take it at individual level. You have an identity card issued by a formal institution. You probably have a mobile account with a formal mobile network operator. You probably even have a bank account. So you can see that, and even conduct transactions through all these platforms. But when it comes to tax obligations, you are informal. Now, and why is this environment being perpetuated? In most developing countries, the tax authority is operating in a silo. Any transaction that involves taxes happening in the economy, the tax authority is the last to know. So that's where the reverse engineering needs to be done, whereby at every point where the so-called informal interacts with the formal, the tax authority must be present there. And these are some of the fundamental reforms that we need to be looking at, and that's what Zambia is working towards. And what should developing countries be doing? Among the key basics need to put in place the identity. Most of the countries will have identity in a manual form, you know? So we need to digitize our identity. Issues of digital ID, very key. And as we come to now integrating into the whole ecosystem, a whole of government or one government approach, it's very fundamental. Like I gave the example, when a company is registered now in Zambia, automatically the Revenue Authority issues a taxpayer identification number, we already know. What used to happen when these two institutions were in silos, the registrar of companies had more companies than we had at Revenue Authority. So integration plays a key role in terms of facilitating that. And as you take the transactions throughout the value chain, wherever there's a gap, you are perpetuating informality and non-compliance. So for us, that's an approach we are taking where we are making sure that we are connected to the various institutions. Then number two, we take a data-driven approach in terms of tax administration, where we leverage third-party information for us to drive compliance. And this is an interesting part because even within ourselves, we are running a customs side of the business and also the domestic taxes side of the business. What we used to find before the integration was that taxpayers would import goods through the border, you know, and export goods, but when they come to domestic taxes, they found new returns. And yet we have the data within the Revenue Authority. So that integration between customs and domestic taxes now helps for us to drive compliance. And what we did as Zambia, we introduced as far back as 2011, we introduced an advance income tax. If you're importing goods and the system shows that you're not filing returns, then you are charged an advance income tax of 15% on your goods. That compels you now to formalize and drive compliance. So we've also gone further now to, last year we introduced it may seem controversial. We are dealing with the issues of illicit financial flows. And what we found is that how are these illicit financial flows perpetuated? I've got this money, $1 million, $2 million. I send out purporting that I'm importing goods into Zambia. Now, from last year, an advance income tax as well was introduced on remittances of above $2,000. If you are sending money out and the source of the money is showing that it's not compliant with taxes, then advance income tax kicks in. So we need to look at what are the entry points, the loopholes through which informality is being perpetuated. And we make sure that we have tax clearance certificates being a mandatory requirement at those particular processes. So yes, and for us to expand the tax base, for us to bring equity in the tax environment, we reduce the tax burden on just a few we can see, expand the base. We need to make sure that we close the loopholes through which informality is being perpetuated in the economies. At a high level, that's what I can comment on for now. Thank you.
Very impressive. Very quick follow-up. Tax clearance certificates in many countries historically have been sources of torture for taxpayers. Are they digital? How do you issue those?
Thank you very much. So for Zambia, we used to have a manual tax clearance certificate, and what used to happen was that at the beginning of the year, I'll get my tax clearance certificate. I don't file returns. I don't make payments. I could continue conducting business until the next December as well. I come back and get another tax clearance certificate. But from last year, that's 2024, we digitized it. So you can get your tax clearance certificate. It's got a QR code there. If you fail to file a return, it changes status from being compliant to non-compliant. But it hasn't been very popular with the people, so definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Rocky, feel free to comment on anything from the Commissioner General, but I thought it would be helpful to just share a little bit about the multiplier, the Coca-Cola company. We all enjoy an ice cold Coca-Cola, and we sit here in an advanced economy, but you think about in the developing world. Number one, the value chain all the way back to the farmer. The important role you play on conserving water, that's your biggest raw material. And you're a very responsible steward of water. But then on the downstream, you think about the lady in Tanzania who has a crate of Coca-Cola on the back of her bike. And then she graduates up and can have a motorbike. And then maybe she has a small truck. And then maybe she can have a store. And I mean, sitting around with a Coca-Cola, or maybe, to be honest, it might have been a beer. It was in the evening. Rocky shared some of these stories, and if you think about the SDGs that they're contributing to, of course, water's one, gender, decent work. It's an amazing story of what's behind a bottle of Coca-Cola. Share a little bit, please.
Well, that was a lot there. So just a little bit about Coke. As I mentioned, we're in all but 3 countries. Give or take every day, we sell 2.2 billion drinks a day, 8-ounce drinks. So when we're talking about quality of regulation, if we don't have a regulation and economy, say on food safety things, we bring the highest standards. We don't go to the lowest standards. If we're required to go to a higher standard by that country, we go to the higher standard to be compliant. But kind of the gee whiz numbers that Dan likes, so there's roughly 70,000 people that work at Coke, 700,000 people that work for Coca-Cola bottlers globally. And our general multipliers, we probably have about 8 jobs for every job dependent on Coke. So 700,000, and get close to about 6 million jobs depend on Coca-Cola. But it can vary widely. Just to Dan's point, the multiplier in the United States is about 9 to 1, but if you go to Colombia, it would probably be closer to 40 to 1. And you ask why the difference is, it's how Colombians shop. So if you're in a small store, many fewer people work in a store, and the sales are much lower than if you go to a hypermarket. So your multiplier is much bigger. So in Colombia, we may have 3 or 4 jobs, or 2 jobs probably upstream on our suppliers, so our agricultural suppliers, people that we get packaging from or just transport. But downstream, it's probably going to be 40 in a Columbia. And that's basically all our small store owners. And then we have to think about recycling. So all the people that collect our products, if it's PET plastic or aluminum, there's a high value in keeping that into the current stream. So if you take PET that's food grade and keep it food grade, it's got a very high value. If you take PET and recycle it and put it into carpet, it's got a very low value. And it's very hard to take carpet back to food grade quality. So we're trying to keep the same product packaging material in the recycling stream because it retains the value of it rather than lose value that's been put in there. And as Dan mentioned, water's the most critical element in all our products in there. Without water, we basically don't have a business. So we try to be very good stewards of it. About 15 years ago, we set out a goal to try to replenish every drop we use. We try to replace a drop in the environment. And I think the last 10 years, we've been averaging more than 100% of replenishment. And you ask, how do you do replenishment? It may be doing a job in Zambia where you go back and invest in repair a riparian area next to a river, planting reeds and other things that really filter the water. When they go in the aquifer, it's much cleaner. So do a lot of work with that with NGOs. And it's been very effective. And then we know we have to be a little better in high water stress locations. So from a business perspective, the business owners or country managers have high risk areas they're responsible for and to getting a replenishment number that's a drop for a drop. So we take it pretty seriously. And from a business perspective, it's a key metric, and it's also a metric that's really built into some of our bonus structure and work structure on that.
Thank you. And let's not forget those tens of thousands, and we're going to call on you next, those tens of thousands are personal income taxpayers and consumption tax, whether it be VAT or sales tax. So that builds the base.
I mean, we agree with Kingani, if you can get more, Dingani, sorry. But get the more people that you bring in through digitizing, through broadening the base, it helps all of us because then the informal sector shrinks and there's less of a burden on the people that are paying taxes.
Madam, please. Come on up. We've got 2 microphones. Kindly introduce yourself and who you're affiliated with. There you go. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, thank you very much for the interesting discussion. I am Mihala Seritano. I work with the Burnos Project. It's been, quite interesting to hear you guys. I have some questions to all of you. So we've been talking about enabling a business-friendly environment, but I can't help but think that we're talking about enabling certain businesses more than others. What I mean here, even the business ready framework of the World Bank, it is quite criticized and contested because it has quite a few weak indicators. For example, when it comes to worker rights protection, it's very much promotes kind of a race to the bottom, deregulation, liberalization approach. And that serves certain businesses more than other. And here I'm talking obviously big capital and big companies over small national companies. Countries that are developing, they really need companies there, nascent industries. They need state protections. They do not benefit from this deregulation. And because it has mentioned a little bit as a joke here, I also have to bring up the OECD pillars, because in this whole deregulation, let's just call a spade, the big capital is the one that evades tax collection the most. And this is what these tax pillars are trying to actually correct. Bring this balance, ensure that states actually benefit and can get revenue collection. So in this, with this said, I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts about how does this fit into like enabling business and development at the same time when we're talking about like deregulation measures that actually infringe tax revenue collection at the state level. Thanks.
Valeria, touch on, I'm sure you think about horizontal equity, and that your first part made me immediately think of horizontal equity. And then, Mr. Commissioner General, I mean, your tax base are more small and medium size in terms of number of taxpayers. So let's maybe if we could have you respond and then.
Thank you very much for the question. I'm actually very glad that this was brought up because labor is really another topic where we have really invested to achieve the strong balance that I was talking about earlier between firm flexibility and social benefits. And we have designed the topic and the indicators very carefully, precisely with the idea that laws, regulations, and public services should not only support firms as they run their businesses, but also protect workers. So we have included indicators on worker safety, labor rights. We have worked closely, for example, with colleagues in the ILO, for example, to discuss our indicators. We look at aspects of social protection, employment services. So all regulations and services that not only help firms run their business, but also help create more jobs, better jobs, and protect workers, while at the same time fostering an environment where growth can happen and more jobs can be created.
Thank you. Commissioner.
Thank you very much. From the tax perspective, we don't look at who is involved, or we're interested in seeing compliance and that being done in an equitable way. But drawing from the reforms I mentioned earlier on, you can see that we are creating a business-friendly environment, not just for the multinationals, but also for the small cross-border trader, like I showed from the different examples that are given. We are making sure that every tax that is due to the government must be collected. And giving you the example of Zambia, we've made sure that mining is a key sector for the country. And for a long time, for example, Zambia didn't have a regulator for the mining sector. For the first time now, a law has been passed in Zambia where there will be a regulator for the mining sector through the Mineral Regulation Commission to make sure that the sector is well regulated. We've also had recent reforms in form of us expanding in our organization structure to create a dedicated mining department. So mining is the only industry that has a department on its own in the sense of ZRA, Zambia Revenue Authority as an institution. We've also expanded our transfer pricing unit. Now it's been established as a unit within the institution to make sure that we have capacity to cope with any form of activities that may be perpetuated at high level. And for Zambia, we were not a member of the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information until last year, 2024. So we became the 171st member, 39th member in Africa to join the Global Forum in 2024. And when we joined, we found that a number of countries don't even have electronic platforms, digital platforms on which they can work and be able to analyze. So Zambia has now partnered with the Africa Tax Administration Forum and the World Bank. We're developing an automated exchange of information system to cope with that. So you can see that we are building institutional capacity, not just at the tax authority level, but also at the national level to ensure that we create an environment where there's transparency and accountability in terms of tax obligations. So at a high level, that's what I can comment on in terms of the tax administration environment we're creating, making sure that both the multinationals and small cross-border traders are being provided an environment where they can conveniently do business, but most importantly, account for the taxes. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Rocky, a quick comment?
Yeah, just to push back a little bit on that, on deregulation. Many countries that we operate in particularly health officials want to put more information on labels for consumers know what they're consuming. For a company like Coke, redoing a label is not a big, expensive process, broadly considering our size. But like many of the members of the associations we're with, if they're a 10-person organization and selling, say, beverages that compete with us, having to change a label in the middle of a year or quickly is a very expensive process. So you think the regulation is very good from a consumer standpoint. It may be enough to turn a small business from operating in the black into the red. So deregulating by being careful about what you're asking, particularly small business, to do, I think deregulation actually works more in their advantage than it would to a large company on being able to afford that. I see that in numerous countries on labeling requirements or ability to reformulate, to change your recipe. If you want to take sugar out, we have a lot of scientists that can do that quickly and safely. If you're a small business, you probably don't have a skill set or have people that are on your payroll that can reformulate your product. It becomes very cumbersome and expensive for them. So just to push back, I think when you deregulate, it can help the smallest of companies, and it can help the large companies as well.
Thank you. That was an excellent, stimulating point. Let's try to get three in. So make them quick, and maybe we'll bundle them up if we can. So sir, and then sir and madam, okay? We'll take, maybe just kind of get ready to jump up at the mic, and we're going to collect all three.
Thank you. I think this is very interesting. I think this is probably for Dr. Perotti and for the Commissioner Banda. We know that malnutrition and non-communicable diseases are crushing health and crushing economies. And actually last year during the World Bank meetings, there was the launch of the World Bank's Nutrition Investment Framework. And one of the strong recommendations is that fiscal policies do more to promote health and nutrition outcomes, including taxes on sugar-sweetened beverages and other unhealthy, ultra-processed foods. So my question is, what can we do more both to analyze the state of the implementation of that recommendation and accelerate its uptake? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the quickness, and there should be somebody hiding behind that pillar ready to jump in. Yes, okay.
Okay, I'll try to make this quick as possible. This question is mostly for Rocky. It's my understanding that Coca-Cola relies quite heavily on, outside the U.S., external bottlers and distribution channels and franchises. And so it's quite easy actually for you to, well, not easy, it requires a relatively low level of investment to enter new markets. And you mentioned that tax is not one of the main drivers or considerations when considering to enter a new market. But for the markets where you do have sort of considerable financial control and operational control of your assets, to what extent are things like the OECD's two-pillar solution impacting how you reallocate resources among jurisdictions, especially given that I think there's some countries who are adopting tax shields for headcount and intangible assets in their jurisdictions. Is this something that's going to impact how you assess going forward?
Okay, thanks for your brevity. Boy, that could be a whole hour discussion. And madam, and we're going to then wrap them up for a quick lightning round of answers if we can.
Hi, my name is Nahida and I work with Christian Aid. So my question is around basically like how Business Ready is analyzing the companies, not the countries, because we would love to see the environmental, feasibility or the loss that you are assessing for the countries and giving them points. I would love to see how you're giving the points to the companies. Recently, we have been seeing different occasions are happening in the developed country. So let's forget about the developing country that we are always interested in these sort of events. Like we try to think about all the problems are in the developing countries. We need more investment to be able to do the growth, economic growth in the countries. So here we have been seeing the data center of Meta how it's been polluting waters in different counties in America, and also the SpaceX, the Elon Musk company XAI, how it's polluting the water and creating respiratory diseases in the county. Would love to see how the developed countries are, facing those problems, and how their strong laws and enforcement are, trying to hold these companies accountable to do the business morally right that is helpful for the community. And on the side of the, just trying to think a bit about the developing country situation. Like Africa is losing yearly 84 to 85 billion dollars in illicit financial flows. That is mostly by the multinational corporations because of their tax evasions. And Asia is losing mostly 73 billion. And if we can, like how your indicator and assessment include those tax suggestions and policies, that how these countries will not lose these taxes that these companies are abusing. And because, these companies have to come to developing countries because we have all the resources. Like look into the French government. They have the more than 2,000 tons of gold reserve in their country and zero gold mine. And look at Africa. They have like all the gold mines and they have zero reserve. Like it tells a lot. Yeah,
you got a lot there.
A lot to say. And
so let's just try to wrap that up so we can get some answers.
I'm doing it very quickly. So I would like to know like how this assessment business ready is keeping ready the companies rather than the countries, and helping countries to enforce laws that will help them to create the fiscal space more equitably. And last, on the Coca-Cola, I would really love to know how the business models is working to end the child labor and the supply chain abuse that is happening in every developing countries. We have seen it in India, in Latin American countries. So would like to know.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And look, the illicit philanthropy, Hafiz, I don't mean to throw you to this wolf, but Hafiz Chaudhry has done a lot of work on illicit financial flows. He spent weeks at a time at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Hafiz, if I could ask you to just share some of your insights with the lady after the meeting, that would be really helpful. Let's do a lightning round. I saw you taking notes. Touch on what you can, please. Not every, and the one thing on the developing our country here, the trial lawyers do a pretty good job keeping these companies to task. No, in America, the trial lawyers can be pretty vicious.
As you wisely suggested, Dan, I'm going to tackle what I can because these
Fair
are
enough.
very big issues, of course, but I can respond in terms of what's within the scope of business ready, right? So let's keep in mind the purpose of this project, which is to highlight actionable policies, regulations that governments can enact to support a sustainable business environment. And a productive business environment. So we don't capture, for example, how fiscal revenues are used by governments. So we look in the area of taxation, we look at regulations and services that enable the firm's activity, but we don't enter into the question on how those revenues are then used by the government. That's a whole other big area for analysis and discussion. Similarly, because we focus on things that are actionable by governments, we don't really score firms. We look at what the governments can do. And certainly, if there's an internationally recognized good practice whereby it should be included in the law, for example, that some things are required from firms as they incorporate, as they operate, then we would include that. But we don't really assess how good firms are at complying with that. In terms of So there are other ways of capturing, for example, firm level outcomes, but that's sort of outside the scope of the business ready assessment. Let me stop here for now.
And I'm thinking of the gentleman's questions in the paradox of malnutrition and obesity, behavioral economics, sugar and other food, sugar, soft drink, food taxes. I think the Commissioner General and Rocky could comment on that. I'm not sure who wants to go first. And then let's make sure we touch on your points too.
Just, I guess I'll hit the last 2 points. On health taxes, there's not a shortage of soft drink excise taxes globally. What their shortage is there's no real-world evidence that a soft drink tax leads to a better health outcome. I would encourage the people at the World Bank to go look at WHO's internal assessment. One is called Choice, all capital letters. The other is called Grade, all capital letters. And in both internal WHO assessments, soft drink taxes are neither cost nor health effective. So in terms of trying to deliver health outcomes, and I think we're all for better health outcomes, that's just it's not a solution to the issue. If you're going to look at something, at least the literature is showing that you need to look more at a nutrient level to have something. And why is soft drink tax not a great excisable good? Usually the 2 ground rules from IMF have been if there are ready substitutes for the product, it's not a good excisable good, or as if it's price elastic, it's not a good excisable good. Soft drinks we have a lot of competitors in the marketplace, and we're very price elastic. So I just encourage you to take a look at that if you're really looking at trying to have an effective health intervention. On the question about Pillar 2, I think the honest answer is it's to be determined on how many countries actually effectively implement the 15% minimum tax. Some countries have committed to it, and they're also trying to work to maintain their competitiveness on this. I know a number of countries are backing away from it. I know the U.S. has changed dramatically in the change in administration. I think you've seen the side-by-side in Section 899 that Secretary Besson is working on this. And I just point out, I think last year in our corporate tax, I think we paid 21 or 22% was our effective rate globally. So it's not like we're under the 15% rate. And in the U.S., we have a provision called GILTI, G-I-L-T-I, that effectively has as a minimum rate in there. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that.
Just at a high level, in the case of Zambia, on the health taxes, the focus has been more on the alcohol and tobacco. I think that's why we've taken a more aggressive policy formulation to try to mitigate the consumptions of those particular products. And from administration side and enforcement, of course, there are a number of measures that have been put in place to ensure that there is compliance also in terms of tax contribution from these activities. And we, as an example, Zambia Revenue Authority recently joined the Coalition Against Illicit Alcohol. This is a non-government organization that is trying to fight against illicit consumption of alcohol, and the Revenue Authority has joined them in terms of compliance, driving compliance. Thank you.
Which tragically leads to many deaths around the world every year. So as we close, let's remember, these are tough things. Human beings always get a little funny when you talk about sharing money. Whether it be you and your neighbor, you and your brother, you make a loan to your relative, we're sharing money between an investor and the state. It gets awful complex. There are many different instruments. But if it's done simple, if it's done right, if it's stable, if it's predictable, those are things he wants as a person funding his government, which really is how do you deliver for the people. And it's things that companies like Coca-Cola want, going back to their boards and their shareholders. It's win-win, and you are aligned. And if it's done right, as our World Bank expert said, it leads to investment innovation and jobs. All of us, regardless of where we're at on the political spectrum, have got to agree those are good things because we know it drives growth and prosperity. And we're all here at the World Bank. I think we can also hold hands and truly be united in that the most important SDG, and it's there as number one, is to reduce poverty. And all of this will lead in that direction. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panelists, and thank you for a lively discussion. Fantastic. Thank you so much. This was really fun. Thank you. Let's get a group photo, if we can, of us up here. Maybe we'll go around the side of the table. That was really good. Who would have
Do
thought
you want
taxes
to-
could be?
Do you want to have a background with?
Oh, yeah.